Blue Origin plans to reach the moon before this year ends. That's the claim the Jeff Bezos-owned rocket company made during a recent gathering of the Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium. A senior vice president from Blue Origin disclosed that the company is currently developing 2 prototypes of its Blue Moon lander. The first prototype is being assembled right now at a specialized facility in Florida and is expected to reach completion within the next few weeks. After that, the Mark 1 prototype will be transported to NASA's Kennedy Space Center and fitted into a Blue Origin New Glenn rocket for a launch scheduled before the year concludes. New Glenn completed its maiden flight in January 2025, and the heavy lift rocket successfully placed a test payload into its designated orbit. The New Glenn booster also made an attempt at a water landing during that mission, but the attempt ended in failure upon re-entry. Blue Origin currently has plans to make another attempt with a New Glenn launch set for August 15th as flight test number 2. Should New Glenn successfully place Blue Moon into Earth orbit, the lander will then ignite its B-7 hydrogen engine to begin a 7-day voyage to the lunar surface. Blue Origin has selected a site on the moon's south pole, and the company intends to achieve a landing precision of under 10 meters from the designated target. After touching down on the surface, Blue Moon will release payloads belonging to both commercial clients and NASA. What's known at present is that the NASA payload aboard will measure the dust displaced by the engine's landing burn. This will be the largest and most formidable vehicle ever to touch down on the moon, surpassing even the Apollo spacecraft. Therefore, there's considerable interest in observing what impact it will have on the lunar environment. It should be noted that 2 versions of Blue Moon exist. Mark 1 is engineered to function as an uncrewed robotic platform capable of delivering approximately 3 metric tons of payload to the lunar surface. This is the version the company is currently testing. But these trials will lay the groundwork for Blue Moon Mark 2. That's the substantially larger human landing system vehicle that NASA has commissioned to transport astronauts to the moon for Artemis 5, assuming such a mission ultimately proceeds. Much of this timeline remains highly uncertain at present, but that hasn't deterred these companies from advancing with their hardware development. Before Blue Origin can transport people to the moon, they must validate another spacecraft. That's the Cislunar Transporter, which is a refueling vehicle engineered to support Blue Moon Mark 2. Since the human-rated lander will be larger, will transport more payload, and will need to launch from the moon to bring its crew back home, it's going to need a refueling operation before making the final approach to the surface. Therefore, the transporter will launch aboard a separate New Glenn rocket and reach Earth orbit. Following that, the transporter will be loaded with surplus propellant from the New Glenn upper stage before charting a course for lunar orbit. The transporter has the capacity to haul 100 tons of fuel from Earth to the moon, or even 30 tons of fuel to orbit around Mars. The transporter will position itself in the same near rectilinear halo orbit around the moon that NASA plans to utilize for crew transfers from the Orion spacecraft. Once positioned there, it will rendezvous with a waiting Blue Moon Mark 2 and pump propellant into the lander. To be perfectly clear, this represents no minor undertaking. A cryogenic propellant transfer in space between 2 separate vehicles has never been accomplished before. SpaceX has been intending to conduct the first orbital propellant transfer this year, but their Starship continues to explode, so it could be quite some time before that demonstration occurs. Blue Origin reports they are actively developing technology to maintain that cryogenic liquid hydrogen at exceptionally low temperatures for extended durations. At a testing facility in Washington State, they've managed to store fuel with 0 boil-off at temperatures dropping as low as -424 degrees Fahrenheit. Regardless, those are all matters that won't become relevant until multiple years down the road. What matters at this moment is that Blue is approaching the completion of their first Mark 1 lander as of right now. They are presently installing the main engine and anticipate that work will be finished by summer's end, and a second Mark 1 lander is following close behind. Within 6 to 8 months following the first launch, Blue Origin will be prepared to make another attempt. So if the initial moon landing doesn't succeed, the company has the chance to refine and implement their improvements. If the initial landing proves successful, then the company leverages that success to build a substantial presence on the moon in 2026. And should everything unfold the way we've just envisioned it would, then that would position Blue Origin significantly ahead of their collaborators in the Artemis program, including NASA, who is meant to be spearheading the return to the moon by providing crew transportation, but has rather been simply trying to maintain pace. There are numerous explanations for this situation: politics, leadership, funding, But even fundamental aspects like engineering and design have been faltering recently. A perfect example is this recent engine test for NASA's moon rocket that literally burst at the seams. The massive solid rocket booster underwent testing in the desert of northern Utah, where Northrop Grumman has constructed and tested this category of rocket since the 1950s. These large auxiliary boosters were initially engineered for the space shuttle and have now been modified to power the Space Launch System, which theoretically will transport people back to the moon within this decade. Motors of this design utilize a mixture of aluminum powder, ammonium perchlorate as an oxidizer, and a binder, which produces a rubbery paste with a consistency resembling an eraser. The paste gets compressed into the booster shell with a hollow channel running straight down the center. The fuel combusts from the top downward and exhaust flows through this channel to the engine nozzle at the base. All of the auxiliary boosters designated for use in the upcoming Artemis missions like Flights 2, 3, and 4 are essentially just repurposed hardware from the Space Shuttle program. But for extended Artemis missions, larger and more potent boosters will be necessary to lift an enhanced SLS and Orion spacecraft combination. So what NASA has implemented are some design modifications to the already decades-old solid rocket motor. This initiative is called the Booster Obsolescence and Life Extension Program. The new booster isn't merely longer but also constructed from a lighter carbon fiber composite casing rather than the previous steel casing. A Pathfinder version of these boosters was constructed at Northrop Grumman's facility in Promontory, Utah, and underwent testing at their static fire stand. The stand is specially engineered to test these solid rockets, and rather than firing straight downward, it enables them to fire horizontally by positioning the rocket on its side. During this particular test, which happened to be the inaugural test for this booster type, observers could witness the plume of exhaust, which manifested as a white cloud of smoke ascending into the air across the Salt Lake Valley. The test lasted just over 2 minutes and appeared flawless until approximately the 100-second mark. At this moment, the test director had just announced deluge activation to cool the pad, as could be heard from the live stream audio, which was intended to prevent the pad from overheating by dousing it with water and dispersing the heat. However, no quantity of water would have prepared the booster for what was about to transpire. Abruptly, exhaust started to leak out from the side of the nozzle. The nozzle's function is to transform slow-moving high-pressure exhaust into high-speed low-pressure exhaust by expanding the plume outward swiftly. This enables the booster to generate more thrust as more material presses against it. Following this, the entire nozzle exploded, hurling debris along with smoke throughout the pad. One of the operators responsible for making the test announcements was heard exclaiming, "Whoa!" before releasing a quiet sigh. They recognized something had malfunctioned and that this test had not succeeded, but they didn't provide any specifics on the stream. Small grass fires ignited around the test stand triggered by the anomaly. Clearly, the business end of the rocket is a crucial component, but a failure at the nozzle won't inevitably cause the entire motor to detonate. This explains why, even following the unplanned disassembly, the booster kept operating for the remaining duration. Since this employs solid propellant, there is no method to shut down the rocket once it has ignited. It will continue burning until the fuel is exhausted. Following the test, Vice President of Propulsion Systems at Northrop, Jim Kalberer, declared, "As a new design and the largest segmented solid rocket booster ever constructed, this test furnishes us with invaluable data to refine our design for future developments." Beyond this statement, minimal explanation was offered, so speculation has been necessary. And after careful examination of official and unofficial recordings, there's a fairly solid theory. It seems the hot gas initially started to escape the booster between the nozzle and the engine skirt. The skirt is the flared-out section directly above the nozzle that contains critical components to guide the motor, likely because of a defective nozzle or improper attachment techniques. A breach was formed at the top of the nozzle, which ruptured after 100 seconds of fiery exposure. As the breach expanded due to the tremendous pressure from hot gas attempting to escape, the components securing the nozzle together failed, producing the first explosion that was observed. Now that the nozzle was destroyed, the exhaust was no longer being expanded and instead escaped the engine through the narrow throat before the nozzle. This also gave way a few seconds afterward in another smaller explosion as some camera angles managed to capture. One consequence of the explosions was a shock wave that propagated up the hillside. This indicates that if a failure of that nature occurred during an actual flight of SLS, then the launch would almost certainly fail even if the booster stays intact, and would likely have activated an abort on the Orion crew capsule, returning the astronauts back down to Earth and resulting in a very brief yet spectacularly costly trip. It's worth noting that the hardware we just witnessed disassemble itself is intended to fly an SLS Block 2 on the Artemis 9 moon landing, so it's not completely clear just how significant any of this truly is, because the only U.S. official remaining in support of a long-term strategy for SLS and Artemis is Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Everyone else has already reached the determination that at best SLS can prove useful to accomplish an Artemis 3 human landing on the moon as quickly as possible, ideally before the Chinese, and then everything that follows will require a bold new direction at NASA. Whatever that direction may be, stay tuned.